Welcome, the anointed ones. The heaviest crown is not made of gold, it's made of survival. Chosen ones, before you even realized you were in an exam, you were already sitting in God's classroom. No paper, no pen, no instructions, just life itself, throwing you into storms, betrayals, losses, and nights where the silence of God felt louder than thunder. And here's the truth most people don't want to admit. The hardest test is the one where the teacher doesn't say a word until the exam is over. Scientists say the average human can endure around 45 units of pain before breaking down. But you endured betrayals that would have broken nations. You walked through fire with your sanity hanging by a thread, yet you never surrendered your soul. That's not normal endurance, that's divine calibration. And that's why it's time to tell you what really happened. You passed. And let's be honest, sometimes it felt less like a spiritual test and more like you were the punchline in a cosmic prank show. If life was a comedy sketch, you were the main character, tripping over invisible wires while the audience gasped. But here's the plot twist. Every stumble was actually a step closer to your unveiling. What looked like humiliation was actually preparation. So lean in, because what you thought was random suffering was actually a divine syllabus. And now that you've passed, it's time to lift the veil and reveal everything God was doing in secret. This is not about pity. This is about power. This is not about endurance alone. This is about emergence. Chosen ones, you survived the kind of test most people don't even know exists. And today you'll finally hear why. Number one, you were tested beyond human measurement. You were tested beyond human measurement, and that's the part most people will never understand about your story. It wasn't just about how much you could take before you broke. It was about whether you could remain incorruptible when life kept stripping away every safety net you thought you had. Anyone can grit their teeth and push through pain for a season. But what sets you apart is that your test was designed to measure something deeper than toughness. It was meant to reveal whether your character, your faith, and your soul could remain intact when every other part of you was stretched past the point of reason. Think about it. The trials didn't just hit your body or your finances. They struck your identity, your dignity, your sense of belonging, and your very belief in the goodness of God. That's not endurance for endurance's sake. That's refinement on a level few people ever experience. God wasn't asking, can they survive? He was asking, can they survive without losing themselves? That's the true mark of the chosen, because survival alone can make people bitter, angry, or cold. But you endured without selling out, without bowing down, and without letting the fire turn you into the very thing that was attacking you. The test wasn't fair, and it wasn't supposed to be. It was divine calibration, a kind of weighing and measuring that separates those who merely exist from those who carry eternal purpose. Others break and blame, but you bent and became. That's what passing looks like, not walking out untouched, but walking out uncorrupted. Even when exhaustion left you questioning your own worth, you never exchanged your soul for shortcuts. Even when betrayal tried to turn you into someone you're not, you held on to the integrity that everyone else underestimated. What's extraordinary is that the passing wasn't obvious at the time. You didn't cross a finish line or hear applause. Instead, you woke up day after day, carried weight you didn't know how to carry, and still refused to let the darkness rewrite your identity. That is what made heaven take notice. The truth is, you weren't being measured against anyone else. You were being measured against the destiny only you could fulfill. And you passed. Not because you were flawless, but because you remained faithful when everything in you was tempted not to. That's what it means to be chosen. Number two, your innocence was the true battlefield. Your innocence was the real battlefield. And that's the part most people will miss if they only look at your life on the surface. The attacks weren't just aimed at what you owned, who you knew, or even how far you could go in life. They were aimed at the purity of your heart, the softness of your spirit, and the light that made you different. The truth is, destroying your possessions or reputation would never have been enough. The real agenda was to stain you, to turn you into someone unrecognizable by poisoning your character with bitterness, anger, or revenge. If they could corrupt your essence, then they wouldn't just win against you. They would erase what made you chosen in the first place. That's why the test was never really about the losses you faced. It was about how you would respond to them. Losing money or opportunities can be recovered, but once innocence is gone, Once the soul is hardened and twisted, that kind of damage is hard to undo. The enemy knew that if you stopped loving, stopped forgiving, stopped believing in goodness, then you would carry the wound forever, even if you looked strong on the outside. And that's why every betrayal, every rejection, every unfair treatment was secretly an attempt to contaminate your purity. But you passed because you refused to let your pain reshape you into what hurt you. You didn't let your heart calcify into stone, even when it felt like giving up on love would have been easier. You didn't let cynicism take over, even when you had every reason to close yourself off. You didn't let bitterness take root, even when it would have been justified. That restraint is not weakness. It's divine strength. It takes far more power to remain soft in a hard world than to let the world's cruelty harden you. The fact that your innocence is still alive is proof that you won the unseen war. You walked through hell, but you didn't come out smelling like smoke. That's why you are rare. Many go through trials and survive, but they survive twisted, hardened, and unrecognizable. You survived intact, and that is the victory no one can take away from you. That's why heaven calls you chosen. Number 3, the silence of God was never abandonment. The silence of God was never abandonment, though in the moment it felt like the cruelest emptiness you'd ever known. Those seasons when your prayers seemed to hit a ceiling, when your cries went unanswered, were some of the hardest trials of your life. But that silence wasn't neglect, it was a different kind of teaching, one that stripped away your dependency on signs, confirmations, and constant reassurance. The silence was God's way of forcing you to grow into someone who could recognize Him without needing Him to always speak. Think about it. When you first began walking with God, you needed Him to answer quickly, to give you signs, to confirm every step. That was the language of a beginner. But chosen ones are trained differently. You weren't meant to live on breadcrumbs of proof. You were meant to become proof yourself. God's silence was not Him leaving you. It was Him upgrading you. He was training you to hear the whispers beneath the silence, to sense His presence without needing the comfort of words, and to trust His hand even when you couldn't see His fingerprints. And let's be brutally honest, it hurt. The silence made you question everything. Was I forgotten? Did I fail? Was I ever chosen at all? Those questions were part of the exam. They dug deep into your faith, pressing to see if your belief was rooted in outcomes or if it was rooted in God Himself. Anyone can trust when they're being carried, but it takes a chosen one to trust when they feel dropped. That's why the silence was never about punishment. It was about producing in you a faith that doesn't shatter when the noise stops. What makes this even more extraordinary is that the silence didn't just test you, it changed you. Somewhere in those quiet seasons, your confidence shifted. You stopped begging for constant reassurance and started walking in authority, not because you felt strong, but because you finally realized God was with you whether He spoke or not. That realization is what proves you passed. His silence wasn't absence, it was strategy. And now you can stand in places where others crumble because you've learned how to move forward without needing constant confirmation. That is the power of being chosen. Number 4, you weren't just attacked, you were studied. You weren't just attacked, you were studied. That's the part most people never realize when they look at the strange, relentless patterns of your battles. Nothing about what you went through was accidental. The opposition wasn't chaos, it was calculation. Forces beyond what you could see watched your life with an almost surgical precision, dissecting your weaknesses, your triggers, your habits, even the people closest to you. Every betrayal, every sudden storm, every cycle that felt too perfectly timed to be coincidence, those were orchestrated. The plan wasn't just to hurt you, but to study you, to find the exact crack where they could break you from the inside out. They watched what made you angry, what made you despair, what made you doubt. They noticed the people you trusted and tried to turn them into weapons. They studied your patterns, your moments of vulnerability, your seasons of exhaustion, and they launched attacks when you were weakest. That's why certain events hit you so precisely it felt almost supernatural, because it was. This wasn't random bad luck, it was targeted spiritual warfare. But here's what they didn't factor in: covenant. They calculated your humanity but overlooked your divinity. They misjudged because they thought you were standing alone. They underestimated the depth of your connection to God, a connection that doesn't show up on their charts or strategies. They expected fragility, in places where covenant had already built fortresses. That's why the weapons formed, but they couldn't finish you. That's why the setups looked perfect, but they backfired. They assumed your breaking point was closer than it really was, because they could never measure the strength that comes from being chosen. And this is what makes your victory so extraordinary. You didn't just survive their attacks, you broke their study. Every time you endured, you ruined their data. Every time you refused to fold, their research collapsed. You became unpredictable because you were no longer operating in human strength, but in divine covering. Passing this test meant not only withstanding the blows, but proving that the very areas they thought would destroy you became the areas that revealed your resilience. What was meant to expose your fragility ended up exposing their blindness. They studied you, but they never understood you. They tried to map your weakness, but they discovered you are unbreakable in covenant. Number 5, your breaking point became your birth point. Your breaking point became your birth point. And that's the truth most people will never be able to wrap their minds around. They saw your collapse as failure, as the end of your story, but in reality it was the exact opposite. That breaking wasn't the closing of a chapter, it was the tearing open of something brand new. You reached the place where human strength simply could not carry you any further, where your willpower, your endurance, your plans, and even your hope came to a standstill. That's where divine power stepped in. Passing the test didn't mean you avoided the breakdown. Passing meant you allowed the breakdown to become the doorway to your rebirth. Everything you lost, every tear you shed, every moment you felt like you were unraveling, it all became the ashes God used as raw material for reconstruction. That's what people on the outside don't understand. They measure survival by who looks the strongest, but God measures it by who's willing to let go, crumble if they must, and trust Him to rebuild them from the ground up. In that breaking, you were emptied of the old self, the illusions, the need for control, and the weight of what no longer served you. The collapse created space for a version of you that was always hidden beneath the surface, waiting to emerge. This is why the very moment others thought you were finished, heaven recognized it as your initiation. The moment you were stripped of what you thought made you powerful was the same moment you became untouchable in ways they could never comprehend. They expected you to be permanently crushed, but instead the crushing became the pressing that produced something priceless inside you. The breaking point wasn't proof of weakness, it was proof of destiny. Not everyone survives that level of collapse, and fewer still allow it to transform them instead of destroy them. But you did. You let the ruins become a foundation for something greater. And in doing so, you were born again, not in the sense of religion alone, but in the sense of identity. You came out with a strength that isn't humanly explainable because it wasn't humanly sustained. That's why your breaking point will always be remembered as the birth point of the real you. Number 6, God let them win battles to prove they couldn't win the war. God let them win battles to prove they couldn't win the war. That's one of the hardest truths to grasp when you're the one living through the blows. On the surface, it looked like defeat. You lost things you cared about. People walked away with what felt like victories over you. Your name dragged, your reputation questioned, opportunities slipping right through your hands. To the outside world, it seemed like you were always on the losing side. But heaven wasn't looking at those moments as losses. They were exposures. They were setups to reveal just how limited your enemy's power really was. See, God doesn't need to shield you from every battle to prove He's with you. Sometimes He allows certain fights to appear as though you've been overcome, not to humiliate you, but to show the world that even stripped, even wounded, even counted out, you still stand. That's the kind of testimony that doesn't come from constant victory, but from undeniable resilience. What they thought was a win was actually their ceiling. They could take possessions, positions, and even people, but they could not take your essence. They couldn't touch what made you chosen, and that was the war all along. This is why the so-called losses were necessary. Without them, both you and everyone watching might have thought your strength came from what you had, not who you were. By letting them win battles, God forced the truth into the open. Nothing external defines a soul anchored in Him. Every false victory your enemies celebrated only highlighted the reality that they had no lasting power. They may have stolen moments, but they could never rewrite your ending. The lesson in it all was simple yet brutal. You didn't need to win every round to prove you were chosen. Passing the test was realizing that survival itself was victory. You walked through the fire and came out scorched but not consumed. You endured humiliation, betrayal, and loss, and still refused to surrender your core. That's not defeat. That's triumph on a level most people will never understand. God let them win just enough to expose that their so-called victories were illusions, while your survival was eternal proof that the war was never theirs to win. Number 7, you carried scars, not stains. You carried scars, not stains, and that distinction is everything. Scars are proof of survival. They say, yes, I was wounded, yes, I was cut deep, but I healed without becoming poisoned. Stains, on the other hand, are what the enemy wanted for you. They wanted the dirt of bitterness to stick, the darkness of resentment to take root, and the ugliness of what they did to become the definition of who you are. That was the goal all along, not just to hurt you, but to mark you in such a way that you would never see yourself as pure again. But here you are, scarred yet uncorrupted. Every scar on you is a marker of truth, a reminder that you endured what should have destroyed you, and instead of becoming twisted, you became even more authentic. The scars you carry don't reduce your value, they elevate it. They are the evidence that you went through the battlefield and still emerged whole. The pain didn't erase your light, it carved it deeper. That's the difference between a chosen one and everyone else. Where others walk out stained, carrying the filth of what broke them, you walked out with scars that testify you were tested, but you were not defiled. And here's what makes this remarkable. Scars tell a story without speaking. People see them, whether physical, emotional, or spiritual, and they realize immediately that you've lived through something heavy. But what they also see is that those experiences did not destroy your softness, your purity, or your ability to love. That combination is rare. Most people either carry no scars because they never faced the fire, or they carry stains because they let the fire contaminate them. You are different. You carry scars that shine as proof that your soul remains untouched. They tried to make you unrecognizable, tried to twist your character until you reflected their damage. But all they managed to do was reveal the depth of your authenticity. What you have now cannot be faked. It's not surface strength, it's not performance. It's the unshakable truth of someone who has endured and healed clean. That authenticity is untouchable. It frightens those who tried to break you because your scars exposed their failure. They meant to stain you permanently, but all they did was highlight that you are chosen, and nothing can contaminate what God has sealed. Number 8, they failed the test they set for you. They failed the test they set for you. And that truth cuts deeper than any attack they ever launched. They thought they were the examiners, holding the power to grade your worth, your strength, and your future. They believed the traps, the betrayals, and the pressure they designed would expose your flaws. But the reality is that the moment they chose to test you, they placed themselves under examination too. Every move they made became evidence, not of your weakness, but of their own corruption. What they thought would discredit you ended up disqualifying them. This is the divine reversal most people don't see at first. While you were walking through hardship, everyone was focused on you. Would you break? Would you give in? Would you fail? But in the background, heaven was recording their actions, their motives, their cruelty. Your endurance became your vindication, while their behavior became their judgment. By trying to crush you, they revealed exactly who they were. They exposed their envy, their lies, their deceit, and their willingness to destroy another soul just to feel powerful. They showed the world the true contents of their heart, and in doing so, they failed the very test they created. And the irony is this: your enemies thought the trial was about your collapse, but the real lesson was about their exposure. You endured, and that endurance testified louder than any defense you could have made. Meanwhile, their schemes turned into a mirror reflecting their own ugliness. What they intended as proof of your unworthiness became undeniable evidence of their own corruption. The trap they set became the very place where they tripped. This is why chosen ones can walk away with peace. The victory isn't just that you survived, it's that their intentions are now written in plain sight for everyone to read. God flipped the script completely. Your suffering became a stage where their cruelty was broadcast, and their actions became a record that even they cannot erase. They thought they were in control of the story, but in reality, the trial was never about testing you alone. It was about revealing them. And in that revelation, their judgment was sealed. They failed the test they set for you, and that failure will follow them far longer than any wound they tried to inflict on you. Number 9, you were refined for leadership, not comfort. You were refined for leadership, not comfort, and that explains why your path has been so brutal. The test you faced was never about easing your way through life. It was about shaping you into someone whose voice carries undeniable weight. Influence without depth is dangerous, and God wasn't about to place authority in your hands without first proving that you could handle it. Every trial stripped away arrogance, every setback burned off illusions, and every loss carved out humility. What you endured was not punishment, it was preparation. Leadership in the kingdom isn't about titles, followers, or platforms. It's about credibility, and credibility is forged in fire. You can't fake it, you can't pretend it, and you can't buy it. It comes from walking through valleys most people would rather avoid and coming out with integrity intact. That's why you were pressed so hard. God needed to know that when the time came, you wouldn't abuse the very influence He planned to give you. You wouldn't use it to dominate, manipulate, or oppress, because you know firsthand what it feels like to be powerless, overlooked, and silenced. Passing this test wasn't about becoming untouchable. It was about becoming trustworthy. The scars you carry are your credentials. They give you authority to speak where others only theorize. They give you compassion that can't be manufactured because you know the cost of suffering and the value of grace. People will listen to you not because you demand respect, but because your story commands it. That kind of authenticity can't be fabricated. It is the fruit of being refined, not indulged. And here's the irony. While others chased comfort, you were being forged for leadership. While some sought applause, you were being stripped down so that when influence finally came, it wouldn't corrupt you. You were emptied of self so that when God filled you, what overflowed would be truth and not ego. That's why your voice carries weight now. It's not loud because it tries to be, it's heavy because it has survived what should have silenced it. In the end, the refinement was never about making your life easier. It was about making your presence undeniable. When you speak, chains break, not because of charisma, but because your authority has been tested, proven, and refined in the fire. That credibility is unshakable, and it's the reason God can now trust you with leadership that lasts. Number 10. Your loneliness was an initiation into divine secrets. Your loneliness was an initiation into divine secrets, though at the time it felt like abandonment. The silence around you, the empty rooms, the lack of support. It wasn't the universe forgetting you, it was God pulling you out of reach. Chosen ones are never validated in crowds. They are refined in isolation, where the noise of opinions and applause can't drown out the lessons only heaven can teach. You weren't hidden because you were unworthy. You were hidden because you were being trained in ways that no audience could ever understand. In solitude, God strips away the need for external confirmation. You had to learn how to walk without cheerleaders, how to keep going without encouragement, and how to trust His presence even when no one else could see it. That's where your foundation was built. While others craved visibility, you were being taught invisibility. Because true power isn't shaped in the spotlight. It's forged in the shadows. Your loneliness was not a punishment for what you lacked. It was an initiation into mysteries only accessible to those who can endure being unseen. And here's what makes it powerful. The secrets you now carry are not things you could have read in a book or learned from another person. They were whispered in the hidden place. They came in moments where you felt stripped, raw, and forgotten. Those whispers reshaped how you see the world, how you hear God, and how you navigate battles others can't even recognize. That wisdom is not the kind that fades. It's timeless, and it sets you apart. The test was whether you would despise the hiding or embrace it. Many people collapse in isolation because they mistake it for rejection, but you didn't. You endured the solitude long enough to discover that God's silence was filled with secrets. You walked away from that hidden season with clarity that cannot be bought or borrowed. Now, when you step forward, you don't just move with knowledge, you move with revelation. Your loneliness was never wasted. It was sacred training. You passed because you didn't let the absence of people make you doubt the presence of God. And now, the very secrets you received in that place are the keys that will unlock destinies, not just yours, but those who will one day look to you for guidance. Number 11, they saw you as weak because they couldn't see your source. They saw you as weak because they couldn't see your source. That was the greatest miscalculation they made about you. To the natural eye, your endurance looked like fragility. You didn't retaliate the way they expected. You didn't collapse in the dramatic way they anticipated. You didn't show the kind of fight they recognized as strength. Instead, you endured quietly, steadily, and faithfully. And to them, that looked like weakness. But what they couldn't see was that you weren't surviving on human strength at all. You were plugged into a reservoir that doesn't run dry, a divine supply that can't be explained by logic or measured by appearances. Passing the test meant embracing that misunderstanding. You had to accept that people would misjudge you, underestimate you, and label you fragile, when in reality you were operating from a power they simply couldn't detect. They only saw the outward struggle, but they missed the inward anchoring. They saw exhaustion in your eyes, but didn't realize there was a flame in your spirit that couldn't be put out. They saw the weight you carried, but not the invisible hands holding you up. To them, you were fragile. In truth, you were untouchable. This paradox is what exposed their blindness. They assumed strength only shows up loud, aggressive, and forceful, but your quiet resilience revealed a strength they couldn't comprehend. Every time you kept moving forward without explaining yourself, every time you stood still when they expected you to collapse, every time you forgave when revenge would have been easier, you displayed a power they didn't know existed. They mistook patience for passivity, but heaven recognized it as authority. And that's the irony. They thought they were watching someone who was breaking down, but they were actually witnessing someone being built up. They saw a fragile vessel. They didn't see the eternal power flowing through it. That's why their attacks couldn't finish you. They were hitting flesh, but they weren't touching your source. They underestimated you because they underestimated God in you. Your so-called weakness became your strongest weapon. It revealed who was truly blind and who was truly backed by heaven. And in the end, what they mocked as fragility was actually proof that you were chosen. Because only the chosen can look breakable and yet remain unbreakable. Number 12, you were called to demonstrate what unbreakable faith looks like. You were called to demonstrate what unbreakable faith looks like. And that's a weight most people couldn't bear even for a day. Faith sounds poetic when it's preached, but living it out is a different battlefield altogether. Faith isn't real until it's stripped of comfort, proof, and safety nets. And yours was tested to the brink of absurdity. You believed when believing seemed foolish. You held on when every sign told you to let go. You trusted God long after it stopped making sense to anyone watching, and even when it barely made sense to you. That kind of faith is not ordinary, it's the mark of the chosen. The truth is, most people only believe when conditions are favorable. They call it faith, but it's really agreement with circumstances. If the money's there, if the support is present, if the outcome looks certain, they believe. But chosen ones are forced into a different reality. Your belief had to exist in the dark, without evidence, without reassurance, and without applause. You had to keep walking as though God was moving, even when silence stretched so long it felt like you'd been abandoned. And yet you refused to quit. That refusal is what defined you. This wasn't blind optimism, it was radical trust. It made no sense logically, but it worked spiritually. You were demonstrating to the world, to the unseen realm, and even to yourself that faith isn't about conditions, it's about covenant. Your irrational trust became proof that there's a dimension of belief that doesn't collapse when facts scream the opposite. That is what unbreakable faith looks like. It's not clean, it's not glamorous, and it's not always pretty. Sometimes it's tears on the pillow and prayers that feel unanswered. Sometimes it's standing still when your knees are shaking. Sometimes it's holding on to a word from God with nothing to back it but your own heartbeat. And yet you passed. You didn't just talk about faith, you lived it out until it became undeniable. That's why you stand out as chosen. Your story doesn't just inspire, it exposes the truth that faith only becomes faith when tested, and yours was tested to the limit. What others call irrational, heaven calls unshakable. It makes no sense, but that's exactly why it works. Number 13, the real test was if you would still love. The real test was never just about how much you could endure, how strong you could become, or how many storms you could outlast. Those things mattered, but they weren't the ultimate measure. The deepest exam God placed before you was this: would you still love after everything? Could you hold on to the core of your heart after betrayal, loss, humiliation, and cruelty? That was the true question, and it was the one that separated you from those who only appear strong on the outside but are hollow within. Because the truth is, pain has a way of making people bitter. Betrayal has a way of poisoning the well of compassion. Loss can make the most tender hearts turn stone cold. Many pass through trials but fail in the arena of love. They come out hardened, cynical, distrustful, unable to forgive, and quick to wound others just as they were wounded. That's the real danger of suffering. Not the suffering itself, but the way it can mutate your soul if you let it. But here's what makes you different. You didn't allow the darkness to turn you into what hurt you. You didn't let betrayal erase your ability to trust God's goodness. You didn't let cruelty destroy your capacity for compassion. You didn't let abandonment strip you of the ability to care for others. That is the miracle. It's not just that you survived, it's that you survived without losing your humanity. That's what heaven celebrates about you. Because power, wisdom, and strength mean little if love is missing. You could have become bitter, revenge-driven, or numb, but you didn't. Instead, you allowed God to keep your heart soft even while life was trying to harden it. That's rare, that's why you passed. To love after pain is not weakness, it's the ultimate display of divine strength. It means your spirit refused to be reshaped by darkness. It means you carry something eternal that trials couldn't erase, and that's what being chosen is all about. The fact that love still survived in you, even after everything, is not just a personal victory, it's the greatest miracle of all. Number 14. You didn't just pass, you became the answer. You didn't just walk through your test and come out the other side with a story to tell. You walked out as the story itself. That's the difference between those who simply survive life's blows and those who are chosen. Survival alone gives you scars, but passing the test transforms you into living evidence of what God can do through a human life. You aren't just someone with a testimony, you are the testimony. When people encounter you, they're not just hearing about endurance, they're seeing endurance. They're not just learning about resilience, they're witnessing resilience. This is why chosen ones carry a different weight in any room they step into. It's not about charisma, eloquence, or trying to convince anyone. Your very presence tells the truth. Yes, the fire is real. Yes, it burns, but no, it cannot consume me. That's what makes you the answer to someone else's question. People wrestling with despair don't need abstract theories. They need a breathing example that hope is possible. And that's you. You became that evidence. Passing the test meant you stopped being a seeker of answers and started becoming one, not because you had all the solutions in your pocket, but because your existence itself carries revelation. The way you endure, the way you forgive, the way you still choose faith after everything. These things preach louder than any sermon could. You embody what people secretly wonder. Can a human being really live through this kind of pain and not be destroyed? And your life answers, yes. This is why God trusted you with the path you walked. It wasn't just about you. It was about others who would one day find themselves where you were. They wouldn't need to look far for encouragement because your life would serve as proof that survival is possible, that transcendence is real, that God's power is not just theory but reality. So when you hear you passed, understand the full weight of that. It's not just congratulations for making it through. It's an announcement that you've now become the very evidence people are praying for. You are no longer a student of the storm. You are its survivor, its revelation, its answer, and that is something no enemy can erase. You have walked a path that few could even imagine, and through every trial, every betrayal, every moment that felt like the end, you did more than survive. You transformed. You endured attacks meant to destroy your soul, navigated storms designed to break your faith, and faced betrayals intended to twist your heart. And yet here you stand, unbroken, untainted, and undeniably chosen. Every scar you carry is not a mark of failure, but proof of divine refinement. Every season of silence, every moment of solitude, every time you felt misunderstood or underestimated, was part of a process that elevated you beyond ordinary understanding. You passed not because life was easy, Not because the battles were fair and not because your enemies were weak, but because your covenant with God is unshakable. Your strength isn't measured by what you held on to, but by what you refused to become. You carried love when it was almost impossible, trusted when it made no sense, and walked faithfully when the world doubted you. You became more than a survivor. You became a living revelation. You are the answer, the testimony, the proof that the impossible can be endured and transcended. This is the moment to embrace your power, your purpose, and your authority. You are no longer merely living through trials, you are embodying the victory that others long to see. Your journey has made you credible, unbreakable, and unmistakably authentic. What the world tried to use against you has only highlighted your resilience. What was meant to shame you has only revealed your greatness. And what was designed to diminish you has confirmed that you are chosen. Let this be the declaration of your life. You passed, not by luck or chance, but by being faithful, enduring, and anchored in God. You have emerged refined, strengthened, and illuminated. The world may have watched your struggle, but now it will witness your triumph. Stand boldly, walk confidently, and let every step echo the truth. What tried to break you only made you extraordinary. You are living proof that God's chosen ones not only survive, they conquer, they shine, and they reveal what it truly means to be unshakable. If this message resonated with you, don't let it stop here. Hit that subscribe button and join a community of chosen ones who refuse to settle for ordinary. Give this video a like if it reminded you of your strength. Leave a comment sharing how you've endured and emerged stronger, and share it with someone who needs to hear this truth today. Every click, every interaction spreads this message of power, faith, and unbreakable spirit. You're not just watching, you're participating in a movement that celebrates survival, authenticity, and divine purpose. Make your presence count. God bless you.